We are recording now. This is Delta Wordweavers on November 8th. So welcome all to Wordweavers. Our next teller is Larry Lariat. So let's hear from Larry. Thank you for coming and joining us today. We have to unmute you.
Okay. I adapted this story from an article in the newspaper, the Laramie Weekly Sentinel from 1887. I call it The Day They Took Charlotte. Although it was 9 years ago in 1878, I remember it like it was yesterday. My husband Henry woke me up mighty early that morning, gave a hug and kiss, and said, "Charlotte, I'll be off in town on business till late afternoon." That was all right with me. I had plenty of work to keep me busy, normal chores. It was about 10 o'clock that morning when those three men rode up to our pioneer cabin. Although our cabin was in a very remote location on the Kansas-Nebraska border, it was not unusual to see groups of men riding about. There were cowboys looking for stray cattle, men scouting for a promising piece of land, and hunting parties. These men were different though. I remember thinking, there's something strange about these three men. Recognizing that was an accomplishment for me. You see, I wasn't raised on the frontier. I was raised to my late teenage years in a thoroughly modern and civilized Midwest town with all the comforts and conveniences of a thoroughly modern and civilized town. When Papa said we'd be moving to a frontier town in Nebraska so he could open a store there, I was very excited. He said it was a great business opportunity, but to me, it sounded like an adventure. I didn't realize how uncivilized and isolated it would be, and dirty. A year and a half later, when I married Henry, I was just starting to get used to that frontier town. But Henry's cabin was even much more isolated. When Henry first took me out to his secluded cabin, I didn't know how I would ever get used to it. How could I become a frontier woman? Well, in the year and a half that we lived there, I became familiar with the customs of the frontier. I learned to manage without the conveniences of town, and I learned to fire a rifle and pistol. I thought I was a pretty good shot. And I learned to recognize the different types of people traveling through the area. The men who rode up this day, they said they were cowboys looking for stray cattle. They didn't look like any cowboys I had ever seen. They weren't wearing the right clothes. And their horses, they were nice horses, but they weren't cow horses. And they all seemed too heavily armed, each wearing 2 pistols and carrying a rifle. All those guns would get in the way of a working cowboy. Another thing was strange. They seemed to know that Henry would be off till late afternoon. I decided these were bad men. They were definitely up to no good, and I started to feel scared. But I told myself, I can't let these men know how I feel. I had learned that on the frontier, hospitality was the rule. So when they asked me, "Can we trouble you for breakfast, ma'am?" I invited them in, hiding my fear. I made them a good breakfast and they sat down to eat. But it was plain to see they weren't hungry at all. They just pretended to eat. When they got up, 2 of the men grabbed me, rushed me out the door, and lifted me up to the third man, who was already mounted on his horse. I'd been expecting them to do something and was actually glad they were going to take me away. Our nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. This would at least give me a chance to be rescued. No one would be around our cabin for hours, but in riding off, we might run into one of those bands of men. So when they grabbed me, I didn't struggle or scream. The men rode off at a gallop, up the river and along the edge of the woods. As they rode, I thought about my options. We might run into one of those wandering groups of men. That wasn't very likely. Henry would be home in several hours. He would see the dirty dishes left on the table and the chair that had been knocked over when they rushed me out the door. I would never leave the cabin untidy. He would find the hoofprints of the horses of the bad men and follow them until he found and rescued me. But that wouldn't be for several hours. I would have to find some way to delay these men from their evil actions. I had to be alert for any opportunity that might come up. After riding for about 3/4 of an hour, I noticed we were approaching a cabin that I recognized. It had been abandoned early in the spring by a settler whose wife had died. The cabin was small and snug, having a heavy wooden door with a bar to secure it, and 2 windows with almost bulletproof inside shutters. The men rode straight up to the cabin and dismounted. I was helped down from the horse before the man who rode with me got down. As my feet hit the ground, my mind and body reacted quickly. I grabbed the pistol from the man who helped me down, bang, and shot him in the leg. Then I ran for the cabin, carrying the smoking weapon in my hand. The half-open door was only 10 feet away, and I was inside and had the door bar in place in just a few seconds. The man whom I had wounded had scarcely cried out before I was inside. My actions were so sudden and unexpected that none of the men tried to stop me. Fortunately, the bar for the door was right behind the door, and as I slid it in place, I felt, phew, now I am safe. 1 man is disabled, and I have 5 bullets left for the other 2. I knew my 3 years of frontier experience had given me the confidence to act swiftly and confidently. The man whom I had wounded had been shot in the left knee and made a serious fuss about it. I could hear him cursing and groaning in a terrible way. I heard him vow, "That woman should be burned alive at the stake to pay for my injury." His companions at first made fun of him and praised my courage and spunk. But when they realized how serious his injury was, that he would probably lose his leg and they had a pack of trouble on their hands, they became extremely angry. They made a rush for the door, expecting to easily grab a hold of me and regain control of the situation. But they found the door locked. They turned to the windows, but they were also locked. It became plain to them that I meant to put up serious resistance, so they pulled back to consider their options. From what I overheard, I was convinced that the 2 men wanted to help the wounded man off and leave at once. But he kept repeating, "I won't move an inch until we get that wounded man. This is a wounded woman. This is a lonely neighborhood and no one's going to come around here before nightfall. You 2 should batter in that door to get that woman." When they pointed out his injury as proof of my bravery, he firstly shouted, "Damn that woman. It was an accidental shot. She has my pistol, but she wouldn't use it again, not even to save her life. You 2 should get a log and bash in that door." They found a large log and dragged it over. Then they lifted it and made a rush for the door. I knew exactly what they were planning, and I was ready. I quietly unbolted the window shutter and swung it back so I could see them. When they began their rush for the door, I lifted the pistol, aimed at the man nearest me, and pulled the trigger. Bang! He fell down and died at once, having been shot through the heart. The other man ran away, but circled back to the wounded man. Then the cursing and ranting and storming began again, and the wounded man propped himself up and emptied the contents of his rifle and pistol in the door and windows of the cabin. I flattened myself against the floor in a corner of the cabin just in time. Several bullets fell inside, but I was in a safe place. After he had emptied his weapon, he called upon his partner, "Get that big rock over there and bash in that door. I'll kill you if you don't." I was looking out the window as he said this and saw that the unwounded man seemed to be more afraid of me than he was of his companion. And he refused to obey, saying, "No, that woman is pretty smart as well as being brave." He was looking at the cabin as he said this and didn't see that his partner, the wounded man, slipped a bullet into his pistol, pointed it towards him and fired. The bullet was meant to kill, but it didn't even hit. The unwounded man turned, drew his pistol, and fired 3 shots into his attacker's body, causing his death in a minute or 2. He didn't go near the body, but waved his hand at me, indicating he was done. He gathered up the horses, tied the rifles to their saddles, and rode off as fast as he could. When I was sure he was gone, I left the cabin and started walking towards home. After a mile, I met up with Henry and 3 cowboys who had come to find and rescue me. I told them what had happened, and the cowboys rode off, pursuing the outlaw for many miles. But he got away. Henry and I made it home safely. All the way home, Henry kept looking at me, smiling, shaking his head. He finally said, "I really didn't have to worry about you." I didn't reply, but I proudly thought, I finally become a frontier woman.
Thank you, Larry. All right, more adventures. Woo! Give them some reactions there.
Oh, good. I like reactions.
There we go. So hear more adventures from Larry on November 19th. He's one of our celebration tellers with more Frontier Adventures. Frontier Adventures. That's his.
No, they're from California, Frontier.
Yeah, it's going to be from California on the November 19th. Our next teller is Linda Walls. Let's get
Okay.
here.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hmm.
there. You are on. Yeah, that's good to get yourself better positioned. There you go. Good.
Okay, here we are. This story is it's named after its main character. It's called Hamad. It's called Hamdani. And for those who weren't here earlier, it's a story that comes from East Africa. All about Hamdani, who was very poor. And Hamdani, he would manage his life such that in order to eat, he found himself looking to the village dump. And there he would scratch and scrounge and scrape about and find just enough grains of this or that, millet, seeds, to keep himself alive. But he had nothing else. But one day when he was down at the dust heap around the village dump, Hamadi found a dime. For the first time, he felt some relief. And it was the kind of relief that, with being Hamadi, it sent him to thoughts about, well, with a dime, I can afford to go home and actually take a nap. And this is what Hamadi did. And the next day, when he went out to follow his usual path of looking for a way, and it was the way to the village dump, he started scratching and scraping away. And then he noticed someone coming that he'd never seen before down the path with a burden on his back in a basket made of twigs. And Hamadi called out and he said, "Hey there, what have you in that basket?" And nearby there were men of more means, and they said to the merchant with the basket, "Don't mind Hamadi. he won't be able to afford to buy any of your wares." But the merchant disregarded the men, and he looked toward Hamadi, and Hamadi got closer and he said, "So, what's inside the basket?" And the merchant said, "Gazelles." And Hamadi thought about that and he said, "Well, will you sell me one of those gazelles for 1 dime?" And the merchant looked at Hamadi. He thought about what the others had said, how Hamadi didn't want to buy anything. He had nothing to buy anything with, and he was just wanting to look at the gazelles. Despite that, the merchant said to himself, and then out loud to Hamadi, "Yes." And the merchant pulled out a small gazelle from the basket of made from twigs, and he handed it to Hamadi, who took it home. And there they were, 2, not 1. And at night time, they slept together, and by day, they went about together. But after about the 5th or 6th day, the gazelle, who had a name of Gajipa that he got from the merchant and who had told Hamadi, "Gajipa, so Gajipa," about the 6th day he said, "You may do all right by scraping and scrapping about for bits of food, but if I keep that up, I won't even survive." And you should know that that came as a bit of a surprise about a gazelle speaking, but we will go further. We'll go fast forward here to Hamadi saying, "Oh," and he didn't look like he knew what to do about it, but Kachipa spoke up and said, You are my master now, and I am not able to leave you. So I have an idea." "Oh, do speak up," said Hamadi. So Kajipa explained that he would go out every day and he would find what he needed and he would always return. Well, Hamadi didn't feel as though he had much of a choice and he agreed. And so every day Kajipa did that very thing. And on about the 6th day, Kajipa, who was scratching at the grass that was growing underneath one of the trees, he saw something bright and recognized it straight away as a valuable diamond. Well, Kajipa managed to wrap that diamond in green leaves and put it in the middle in his mouth, and he carried this diamond with him. And he carried it all the way to the Sultan's house, where he was able to present it, or at least himself, to the Sultan. And the first thing he did was say to the Sultan, I am here to see if I might make an arrangement with you about working together." And the Sultan looked at Kajipa and said, "Well, I am thinking about family alliances." And Kajipa said, "Family alliances is just what I am thinking about. Um, I am thinking about your daughter, who I hear is very beautiful, and I have something I can pledge." And when the Sultan saw what Kajipa had to pledge, which he saw after Kajipa unrolled the green leaf, and there is this diamond, the Sultan agrees. And so Kajipa finds himself needing to explain to Hamadi what has happened. And by this time, Hamadi is beside himself because he thought that Kajipa was not going to keep his end of the bargain. And he can't figure quite what is going on about this. And by the time Kajipa sees Hamadi, he's in tears. Hamadi is crying left and right and practically despairing. And Kajipa says, well, what I need you to do, Hamadi, is something that will surprise you, but we are going to make our way to the Sultan's. We are going to make our way, and you have to trust me that this will work. And so together, Hamadi and Kajipa make their way to the Sultan's palace. But on the way, Kajipa arranges it such that that he explains to Hamadi that Hamadi must. It would be good if we went by the stream and you can clean up and get looking like a fine person. And so Kajipa and Hamadi clean up Hamadi to look like a fine person. And then Kajipa goes further and explains how he needs to stay there and trust Kajipa and not even keep his clothes. He is just there, clean and a fine man, but with nothing. And then Kajipa convinces Hamadi that Hamadi will remain like that for the time being. And that's when Kajipa gets further to the palace. And our story got a little bit ahead of itself. This is the point in the story where Kajipa says to the Sultan that he was bringing his master to present his master, but that there had been some terrible trouble with his master, and his master needed a huge assist. And the Sultan immediately brings himself and his resources, and that's where they find by the edge of the stream Hamadi with no clothes and looking like he'd been beaten. And so immediately the Sultan comes to the rescue, and he sends for people to fetch clothing, which of course comes back as fine linen, fine silks, and they all go back to Hamadi's castle. And I need to speed this up. And let's try to sum this up a little bit faster and find out that Hamadi gets taken in by the Sultan, and Kajipa is able to marry the Sultan's daughter. And Kajipa is also able to convey to Hamadi that many things had come Hamadi's way, but that Hamadi had never thanked Kajipa for the things that came Hamadi's way that were thanks to Kajipa. And it had hurt Kajipa a great deal. And Hamadi was left to bear the burden that he had created for himself by not thanking when there was time to be grateful and not expressing any of that gratefulness whatsoever. And so by the time we get to the end of this slightly too long story for the venue today, we shall rest it with with the sad consequences of what became of Hamadi. And the way that the folk tellers of old presented this, which was that while Kajipa was able to be happy and live with the daughter of the Sultan, the Hamadi was not able to continue in this way whatsoever. And he was still back at the dust heap scratching for victuals. And we shall just say that he perishes. And as the story is supposed to come to an end, it is that there is a choice given, and that is, if the story is good, then its goodness belongs to all. And if it is bad, the badness belongs to the person who tells it. That gives you an awful lot to take in, but that is how we are ending it for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Sounds like a long story. There's more parts to it. Yeah, for another day. Like a saga. Hear from Linda to see how she links those two. Okay, try that, Linda.
I think I missed something.
Which Linda? Linda Kennedy?
Yeah, Linda Kennedy, you're on.
Okay. Yeah, good. Okay. Are you ready?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. One of my favorite quotes from Mr. Rogers from over the years was when he was interviewed after the 9/11 incident, and people asked him, "What do we tell the children?" And he said, "Well, what my mother used to tell me when I was a child and bad things happened was to look for the helpers and to remember that we're all neighbors. Some of us are the givers, and then sometimes some of us are the receivers, but we're all neighbors." And if you remember, besides all of the helpers that we did see at Ground Zero for days and days and days, we also saw a spirit across the country of a bonding of families and community, neighborhoods, knowing that it was a time for us to remember that we are all neighbors. And it's in that spirit that I tell this little folktale. The merchant's son was getting ready to go on a long business trip to all of the cities and towns in the land to visit the marketplaces where they traded imports and exports. Before he left, he said to his family, his parents, he said, I'll be gone so long and I'll be going into so many places. I just might find a young lady that I would like to have her as my wife. But I'm wondering, what kind of things should I look for? Well, father first said, well, a dowry is nice, but remember, sometimes wealth will disguise envy. It'll disguise improper entitlement. Be careful about wealth. And then mother said, and of course you want her to be a beautiful girl, but remember, sometimes beauty is just skin deep. And then dad said, bottom line, a wife will be kind, compassionate, excuse me, compassionate and wise. And take this riddle with you. And the riddle was this: if you were given just one big fish, what would you do with it to make sure that you could feed your family for a long, long time? So he took the riddle, and the son went out on the business trip. And like his parents said, he would meet lots and lots of these lovely young ladies. And he had that riddle. Now he met this one lady. She was just such a nice person. And she was wealthy. The parents lived in a mansion. She wore elegant clothes. She had jewels on every finger. And so he decided to ask her that riddle. He asked her, if you were given just one fish, what would you do so you could feed your family for a long, long time? And she laughed at him. She said, that is such a silly question to be asking me. Why don't you go ask my cook? She's in the kitchen. Well, he felt no warmth in his heart from her. He went on village to village, town to town. Again, he would ask the riddle over and over again. He found this one gal. She was just quite lovely, flawless in every way, until he asked her that riddle. And she goes, ew, why would I want that stinky thing in my house? What a silly question to be asking me. And again, there was no warmth in his heart from her. He went on, village to village, town to town, city to city. And then he got to a small town, into a small mercantile, family-owned, and he admired a certain young lady in there, the daughter of the owner. He noticed how kind she was as she talked to the customers. He noticed her compassion as she asked the customers about their family. But was she wise? He asked her that riddle. What would you do if you were given just one fish? What would you do so it could feed your family for a long, long time? And she said, well, the first thing I will do would be cut off the parts I don't need and give them to the cat as a reward for keeping my house clean of mice. And then I will take the fish and cut it up in many pieces and put it in a large pot of vegetables from the garden. And when that fish stew is ready, I will invite the family to sit at the table, and my neighbors and my friends, because someday it might be just one of them that has a fish, and they will remember our kindness and invite us to share that fish with them. And you see, that way, my fish will continue to feed the family for a long, long time. Well, it wasn't long after that before that young lady got her first piece of jewelry, a gold band on her hand. And the merchant's son and that lovely young lady got married. They invited their friends and family and neighbors to a delightful, delicious wedding feast of fish stew. And they were all fed happily ever after. So let's make the most of this beautiful day. And since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Would you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please, won't you be my neighbor? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you. And in the spirit of sharing and being kind to one another, it can go beyond our human friends. Let's think about our animal friends, because Sarah Lord's story has something about that. So we're going to hear from Sarah Lord. Use your imaginations as you listen to her story. Sarah Lord.
A true whale tale. Go with me in your imagination. Close your eyes. Take a gentle breath. And it's a Sunday morning in early November, 2005. We're 18 miles off the coast of San Francisco. A crab fisherman is working his traps and enjoying the quiet of the calm water and early morning sunshine. He slowly becomes aware of the sounds of distress. He pulls in his gear as fast as he can and motors in the direction of the panicked splashing. When he arrives, he sees a 50-foot whale thrashing frantically. He motors slowly around the whale, and what he sees breaks his heart. Wound around the whale are yards and yards and yards and yards of trap rope. There are 12 traps and weights securely attached to the ropes, all of which total must weigh about 1,800 pounds. To make things worse, one of her fins is tightly tied to her body. The crabber becomes concerned as he realizes that by himself he can't help her. However, he remembers that he has his ship-to-shore radio. He calls the local rescue center. Usually no one is there on Sundays, but today, luckily, a volunteer answers the phone. He says it would take a while to round up the other rescuers and get out there, and it was now 10 a.m. The rescuer says that they will come just as fast as they can. The crabber continues to circle the whale. He doesn't know what to do, so he talks to her. He does the best he can to soothe her. 4 hours later, the crabman and the whale hear the magical sounds of engines coming towards them. When they get there, the volunteers survey the situation and decide, we can't help her from her boats. She needs the ropes cut. The divers decide to go into the water. They carefully and slowly move up to the whale, and luckily they had just received their specially designed knives that will cut rope safely and not hurt animals. The rescuers work for hours and hours and hours. The whale seems to know that they're helping her and stays as still as she can. Well, finally, they get all the ropes cut except the ropes that free her mouth. All the divers look at each other. Who's gonna go? That mouth is big. Finally, one brave diver moves towards her and begins cutting the remaining ropes. The whale keeps an eye on the diver, and that diver keeps an eye on the whale. And finally, 10 minutes go by, 15 minutes go by, 20 minutes go by. The diver is still cutting those ropes. And then 30 minutes go by. And finally, she is free. Very slowly and carefully, she backs out of the circle. And she goes out and dives with enthusiasm and goes all around the divers and the boats. However, she returns to the circle. She carefully moves up to each one of the divers and nuzzles them. After she's nuzzled the last diver, she slowly and carefully backs out. And we see her joyously diving one more time around that circle of boats and rescuers, and then she takes off out in the ocean. Everyone there knows in their hearts that that whale has said, thank you. The end.
Okay, thank you so much. That was fabulous. So animals are thankful, and they even show their gratitude sometimes. That's pretty nice. I'll bet your dogs show you gratitude.
Yeah.
Let's unmute everybody. Yeah, they do, don't they, Sarah?
Yes, they do.
Let's see. Yes, they do.
Sarah, are you there?
Wonderful.
Yes, I am.
Thank
Yeah,
you for
you
bringing the
Go
word
ahead.
nuzzle. The word nuzzle is so wonderful. And now it's more, even more wonderful since your story.
Oh,
Thanks.
thank you.
Yeah, unmuting people here. So I will announce, we just mainly have, the first one is on Tuesday, the website to go to shortly, and on the 10th, that's when Betsy, who's here, and myself, so Delta Wordweavers and South Coast Storytellers, yes. So we have about 7 tellers, and we're telling, let's see, there's 2 from the late 1800s, then 2 stories from the early 1900s that are struggles of the Latinos and the Blacks and about being in California and what it was like for them. And then there's 2 college stories. Oh yeah, David's here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chippenton's there.
So David's here and he's one of our tellers about college days.
Mhm.
And Betsy will also share a story. So we have from different eras.
Mhm.
And so we're excited
this
about
is-
that. What?
This is on a Tuesday,
The question?
Thursday.
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 Is this celebration?
Okay, Telebration for
Yes.
Delta Wordweavers. They're behind me.
I can't
Yeah.
read it.
That's true. The yellow says Thursday, November
19th.
19th at 7:30. That's for us.
Yeah.
There are 1, 2, 3,
Oh, that's 10.
5 celebrations, and here is let me get this,
Can't read it.
storysack.org. There we go.
Yep.
So those who don't have it, it's about the Storytelling Association of California. That's what that is. Storytelling Association of California. Storysack.org. You go there and there's a drop-down menu that says SAC Celebrations. You click on that and it shows you all 5. It
Okay,
shows
thank you.
yeah, it shows you where to register because you do need to register and it's not even the same link as what you did for today. So it's a different one. So for 5, you can go to those. Any questions about those?
No, but I want to share a comment
Yes.
to everyone else that Marion came to our South Coast Storytellers meeting via Zoom one time, a few months back. We started talking about Telebration. She said, well, why don't we pair up? And all of a sudden she had 5 or 6 different Telebrations organized. And NSN, the lady I was emailing with, said, why didn't we think of that? It's brilliant. So thank you, Marion, for the brilliant suggestion to pair up Southern California and Northern California storytelling groups.
Marion's a tiger.
Gonna be fabulous.
All right. Yes, it's going to be. Yeah, it's a first. The Storytelling Association of California, which was I was on the committee to help it organize as an organization. We tried to get Southern California, and they wanted to. We wanted to, but physically, in the time, it just was hard to get volunteer people to drive for the board meetings and stuff like that. We're in a new time.
Yeah.
We're in Zoom time, and look at how close we are. So while it's difficult, it has also opened opportunities for us. So
Yes.
for that, we're grateful. Even though we struggle, we're still learning it, but we're learning it and we will take advantage of it, especially for Telebration.
Yeah.
So hope to see you, especially on the Thursday, the 19th, but I will be a visitor at the Tuesday night and they're all free if you choose to donate to NSN, National Storytelling Network. They started Telebration in 1988. So it's been, and it started with like, what was it, 7 people or something like that. And then the next year it went around Tennessee, and the year after that it went to more states, and today it's international. So yeah, you can go on the National Storytelling Network and go to their calendar and see celebrations all over the world. So there you go. We are glad you've enjoyed today. And I'm going to stop our video. Let's see.
Marion,
Yes.
will we be sent a link to this immediately before the Thursday